Testing, testing.
This meeting is being recorded. You are the only participant.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alan McGee, one of the professors here at ABSC. Thank you very much for coming. This is a momentous occasion, actually. This is the first time we're using this room for a guest speaker and using all the technology, such as the video recording equipment and that kind of thing. So we are testing it out for the first time, and we have what I think the makings of a real good discussion about to happen here. The three gentlemen that you see in front of you represent different parts, different players in the industry. I'd like to introduce them now, and then we'll get the discussion going. So, on my far right is Andrew Ojime, who's one of the partners in Auto IQ, which you may have noticed sponsored that lounge room way back there, and we thank you very much for that. In the middle is Lev Kowalski, who is a dealer solutions, mergers and acquisitions specialist, and also an alumni. And closest to me is Grant Patterson, who is manager of dealer development for Subaru Canada. Let's welcome our guests. So as you can tell from the speakers who have come, today's topic is all about dealer network development and market representation and the buying and selling of dealerships. So we're looking forward to a lively discussion because I think each of the three gentlemen have a little different perspective on the topic. But to get us going, I would ask each of our speakers to give us a brief description, a biography of who they are, where they've been, and what they're doing now. So please take it away. Whoever wants to start first. Yeah, sure.
Good afternoon. So my name is Grant Patterson. I'm the manager of dealer development at Subaru Canada. I was actually the first group to graduate from the automotive degree program. Anyone in the degree program? Right on, right on. So I spent 4 years here from 03 to 07 as a young, enthusiastic member of the automotive industry. I wasn't smart enough to go into engineering, so I figured the next best bet would be go onto the business and sales side. So after doing some co-ops on the corporate side primarily, and I did a co-op actually in the dealership world as well, I got hired on at the age of 23 by General Motors of Canada, and they shipped me out to Kelowna, British Columbia at a nice young age, so I really ticked someone off to go up to Kelowna. I spent 3 years there, went through a monumental change. If anyone remembers, General Motors went through bankruptcy in 2009. I was on the corporate side as a fixed operations manager and also as a district sales manager, and I'll never forget, it was May long weekend in 2009, that's when 244 General Motors stores were separated from the GM network. So that was one of those pivotal moments, and I'm sure as everyone realizes, Chrysler went through some issues as well. And to go through that and working with dealers closely, it was one of the most historical moments I think that our industry has been through. And to be part of that, it was scary. I didn't know if I was going to have a job. We went through 3 rounds of headcount reductions, and it was a scary time. Dealers were losing their rooftops, they were losing their franchises, and on the corporate side, people were losing their jobs as well. So I did that, really ticked someone off, and ended up in Edmonton. I spent 2 years there, and that was interesting. But I got to see great parts of this country, Northwest Territories, Whitehorse, you name it. I've been all over Western Canada. Came back, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, we wanted to come back to Ontario. We decided to get married. I did a brief stopover in the fleet leasing world. That was kind of fun, but wasn't really my forte. And I noticed something with Subaru. I kept on watching the Subaru brand year after year. They were winning ALG awards, Black Book awards, and their whole mantra with their dealer network was a very positive working relationship. So I got hired on as a district sales manager, spent a lot of time on the road looking after dealers here in Ontario, And then recently, about 2 years ago, I moved over to dealer development. So if you want a dealership, you have to get through me first. So that's pretty well my spiel in a 5-minute elevator pitch.
My name is Lev Kowalski. Like the two gentlemen sitting next to me, I'm also a graduate of Canadian, well, was CAI at the time, aged me a little bit there. I graduated in 2006 from Georgian College. Prior to that, I had spent a lot of time, like a lot of people in automotive, on the retail end of the world. Started out at 18 really undercoating and detailing vehicles at a Mississauga Volkswagen store, and stayed in the automotive retail side throughout my time at Georgian College. And once I graduated here, went back to that dealership. I worked as assistant sales manager there, and then as an F&I manager there, and put my time in on the retail end of it. At that point in time, I was approached by a supplier, an F&I supplier / trading company, and they gave me an offer I couldn't resist, which was, how would you like to have your weekends and evenings back? And after a number of years in retail, I thought that might be a good avenue for me. And I ended up going to work for a company called Final Coat for 7 years. I was provincial F&I trainer for that company. I worked with about 180 dealers across Ontario. And after 7 years there, I decided it was time for a change. I'd been approached by a truck manufacturer, a company that builds truck bodies out of Laval. And they were the largest truck body manufacturer in Canada and had no presence in the Ontario market. So I ended up saying, you know what, let me see what the commercial side of the world's like. I'd never been in it, didn't know much about the truck business, but I spent my time on the road and was a road rep for 7 years and figured it can't be that different. So I spent 4 years with them building the province of Ontario, had a significant increase in sales and market share for the Ontario market for them. At that time, I actually had 2 truck dealers approach me, clients of mine that said they wanted to sell their businesses. I had no idea how to go about selling a dealership at that point in time, so I'd reached out to 2 gentlemen I know in the industry who own a company called Dealer Solutions. It's Fareed Ahmed and Arthur Majarian, and I'd approached them and said, I've got these 2 dealerships, they're in the truck world, and these guys specialize in automotive. I said, I don't know the process, but maybe we can get together and you can help me out. We ended up closing those 2 transactions, and at that point in time, they looked at me and said, well, you know the truck world, you know the automotive world, we can teach you our end of the world, why don't you come and join us? So I joined Dealer Solutions now about 4 years ago. At that point in time when I started, there were 3 people in a 10 by 10 foot office. We've grown since then. We're now 36 people across Canada and the States. We've got 3 corporate offices in Canada and 2 corporate offices in the United States. And in just about 4.5, 5 years, we've done 182 mergers and acquisitions of car and truck dealerships and over 600 dealer valuations. So we have a pretty good insight into the marketplace out there currently, and we're continuing to grow. We're opening up offices in England probably by June, July of this year. We partnered up with a big British company there, and that's kind of been my road to where I am currently.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Ojemi, and I'm the better looking Lev Kowalski. Older. Younger. I'm a partner in AutoIQ. So just by way of background, I started my post-secondary in computer science and physics, which is a bit of an unorthodox path to get here, but realized real quick that wasn't the path that I wanted to be on. And I grew up in a small family-owned car dealership. It was a Ford Mercury store, so the combination of those 2 brands probably gives you an idea of the size. It was a 1-horse town, 3,000 people. The best thing that could have happened to me in my life is that store no longer exists. So about a year into computer science and physics, I realized that this was the car business, and in particular the retail car business, is where I wanted to be. So I transferred here. I think the computer science and physics maybe was driven a little bit by the fact that when you're 18 years old, your parents don't really know much, and it was a little defiant. Anyway, so I ended up here when it was CAI, like Lev. I'm a graduate in 2001. I did 3 co-ops, one with GMAC, one with a company called Car Canada at the time, which was a used vehicle superstore, a number of locations. And my 3rd co-op was with a small fledgling finance company called VFC. And that was in 2001. When I graduated, our graduating class was addressed in a course called Networks, which I strongly encourage the school to get. I'm happy that this is going on. I'd strongly encourage the school and the curriculum to put something like that back on, because we managed to meet so many people that were influential in the business and became peers and mentors as our careers grew, I think. Anyway, my class, my graduating class was spoken to by a fellow by the name of Mike Stollery, and he was a young entrepreneurial car dealer at the time. He had a couple of dealerships and just full of integrity and just a real sharp guy. And I left that class and I wrote him a letter. And the letter was basically that Mike and I were going to partner and we were going to own retail together. We were going to figure out how to just dominate the space. And before I had time to mail that letter, I was offered a full-time position from my final co-op, like many of you probably will be. I thought, well, why would I go home with the first girl that I met? Why don't I go work for this finance company and see what all the other dealers look like across Canada, and maybe there's an opportunity that exceeds this one, or maybe I'm just jumping too quick. Anyway, that small finance company, I was employee number 28, and that was 2001. In 2003, we had grown to a portfolio of about $400 million. We specialized in non-prime automotive loans, so special finance, finance opportunities for auto finance for the non-bankable consumer. And so by 2003, we'd grown our portfolio considerably. We were about $400 million in auto receivables. I think Lev had been a co-op on my team by that point. We went public on the TSX. We IPO'd for $6.50, and almost 3 years to the day later, we sold the company to TD Bank for about 3 times that original offer. So being young and involved in a real entrepreneurial company that grew very quickly was rewarding, and so the first 4 years went by real quick. And then 3 years later, almost today, in 2009, we integrated VFC's auto finance business with TD, their retail prime auto finance business, so basically consolidated the efforts of those two businesses. And we had grown so substantially from 28 employees when I first got there to we were originating $10 billion a year in auto finance receivables, 4,000 staff across North America, and part of an 80,000 person larger enterprise in TD Bank. And in about 2011, TD acquired Chrysler Financial, or the remnants of Chrysler Financial, following sort of the financial crisis. And we were very quickly becoming, I'm very proud of the organization that still remains. However, it is a different organization than a 28-person entrepreneurial company. And it very, very much became more corporate, more bank-like, if you will. And so I started revisiting the journey to be back in the retail space. And over an 11-year career in auto finance, my career, I worked through a variety of positions, manager, business development, inside sales manager. My final position at TD was National Director of Sales and Marketing. So we had a team of about 100 people across Canada that called on dealers and ultimately tried to position our product relative to Scotiabank or captive lenders, etc. And over that time, I'd met a lot of car dealers and a lot of folks in the industry, and thought it's time to revisit the retail aspirations, and which was always the plan. The entire 11 years was always the plan. I was just trying to find the right spot and trying to find a home. And I reached out to 4 guys who I developed relationships over the years, and one of them was Mike Stollery. And in 2012, I reached out to him because guys like Lev hadn't really fully, developed their industry yet. So how do you find a car dealership? It was a very inside track. There were certain people that knew when they were for sale or when they were available. And what do you do when you find one? I wouldn't know what to do if I did find one to buy. So reaching out to these guys was for mentorship and leadership and direction, and forever ever grateful. They're some of the best retailers in the country, in my opinion. And Mike called me about 6 months after we started having breakfast meetings, and he said, "Look, we've got a deal here, and it's pretty broken, and I'd be interested in partnering with you on it, but it's not going to check all your boxes." One of my boxes was complete ownership, and so we got together, and in 2012 we bought Kitchener Ford, which was a dealership that the year prior had lost $700,000. So my wife and I sold our house, mortgaged everything, moved into an apartment that we could barely afford at the time, and put everything that we owned into this business. We turned it very quickly. We lost money 1 month over the last of any period that we've been there. So it's been a great story. It's been really successful. That dealership today, these 2 gentlemen in the front row actually are co-ops at, or have been a co-ops at. That dealership today is the 3rd most profitable Ford store in Eastern Canada. It retails about 1,800 retail units a year. It's a great store. And for later on, when we're talking about facilities, we do that out of a 2-car showroom. So I don't believe necessarily facilities directly sell cars. So in 2015, following that, we acquired 2 additional stores, a Hyundai dealership and a Nissan dealership, both in Kitchener as well. In 2016, sorry, I should sort of a footnote here. I had 2 partners originally. One was Mike Stoller, and one was a guy named Brian Finch, who owns an auto group in London as well. In 2016, we divested of the Nissan store, using my friend Lev here as a conduit to have that happen. And in 2017, we acquired a Toyota store in Welland, Ontario, a Ford store through Lev in St. Catharines, Ontario, a General Motors store through Lev in, there's a trend here, right? For royalty, in Grimsby, Ontario, and then this summer we acquired a Ford store in Hamilton, Airport Ford Lincoln. So today our organization is a group of 16 car dealers spread across Ontario. We like to brag that we're within 30 minutes of 85% of the population of the province. So we have a great distribution network. We prefer B markets, so we're not in the Torontos sort of the world. We're in the St. Catharines, the Barries, the Kitcheners of the world. And those 16 dealerships are split up into platforms. My responsibility falls into a platform of 6 dealerships where Mike and I are partners, and in some cases we have an additional partner who's an operator day-to-day in the store. Yeah, that brings us up to speed.
That's great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. All right, so let's open up the discussion then. The topic today is about dealer development and market representation. So it's all about the dealer network. So I guess the first question I'll ask is, from the OEM's perspective, in developing your dealer network, what are you looking for when you decide you want a new dealer or the dealership's changing hands? How does the OEM approach that? And the other gentleman, jump in if you have an opinion to offer after Grant answers that question.
Everyone hates the factory, first of all. No, in all honesty, really from our perspective, from the OEM side, our biggest thing is we want to make sure our brand is looked after. This is a business partnership with the retailers. We're in this together. So the OEM is dependent on the retailer's success, and the success of the OEM is dependent for dealers as well. So from our standpoint, we want to make sure they're well capitalized. We want to identify indirect and direct people that are involved with the dealership. We need to do our due diligence, even if that person doesn't have any operational control over the dealership. If they're pulling it out as an investment, we want to make sure a dealership does not go into financial distress. Management of the store, that's a big thing. Facilities, as Andrew mentioned, it's not the be-all, end-all. Our industry is changing as a whole, but operational philosophy, and I think you guys will all agree, customer experience is trump these days, and you got to make sure that operational philosophy really, really comes through. From an open point standpoint, that's something that Subaru as a whole, we're still growing our network right now. So from our standpoint, when we look at doing an open point, we'll do a study across the country, and we'll basically identify certain points where maybe we don't have the greatest representation, and then we'll contract that through IHS, formerly known as POC, and basically they'll do a market study for us on an identified area, and then they'll give us optimal locations, and basically benchmark our brand against some of our core competitors. So then we'll know, okay, listen, based on all the philosophies and kind of the way the numbers jig out, you know what, we should be going into this market. For example, like I've done 2 open points since I moved into this role. So we did Guelph, and then we just closed Windsor in the last 2 weeks. So, and those were all derived from data. Being a sales guy, you know what, your gut tells you one thing, but you got to have the data to back it up at the end of the day. So that's a little bit from the OEM perspective, how we decide, you know what, where we want to develop our network and make sure that we have the right points and the right dealers in the right locations.
Andrew, perhaps, or Lev, do you want to comment?
I'm just going to take from our perspective, you know, we're involved from a transaction from point A to point Z. Everything from the valuation to manufacturer's approval being the big one, and then to the close. And having done as many transactions as we have to be very cognizant of what we're bringing to the table. And we've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to have relationships with the majority of the manufacturers across Canada. And although they all have their own idiosyncrasies, we now know what their standard is for a new acquisition. People approach us on a regular basis, people who may have millions and millions and millions of dollars, but may not have the experience or the people or the management with them in order to run a store properly or take it to the level that a manufacturer wants. So just because you have the money to spend on a dealership doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it. And we, as a broker, have to be extremely cognizant of what the OEM is looking for that point, depending on location, depending on size and the store itself that we bring to the table. So again, it really comes down to the end of the day, you may be looking to buy a store, you could have all the money in the world, but without the experience and without the OEM approval, it's, my suggestion to you is get as much experience as you possibly can under your belt.
I guess I'll speak from the evaluation of the investment perspective. ROI obviously is a critical part. I'll be just a funny little anecdote. I think when I was first started down the path of trying to find a store to buy, I thought, well, I'm going to create the most epic spreadsheet of spreadsheets where I can enter every variable known to mankind.
I remember those spreadsheets.
I was talking to a friend of mine, and his name's Jared Briesner, and Jared's the CEO and president of Go Auto, which is a large auto group in Western Canada. And we were in his backyard. He said, "Okay, to walk me through your model." And he's got a napkin and a pen, and he's walking me through this model. He goes, "Okay, well, you forgot about the part where the former dealer's kid still works there, and you got to guarantee him a job for 6 years, and the former owner wants to live in Arizona, and you got to give him a demo." It's like to Liv's point, sometimes there's idiosyncrasies that you're not going to see necessarily in a financial statement. Sometimes the owner wants to be the landlord, and he wants to secure the property for a period of time. So, and often, just a financial isn't going to give you the full scope of it. So there is a bit of gut, I think, on the dealer side. But from a financial perspective, or the question is, how does the dealer evaluate an investment opportunity? In my opinion, money goes where it's appreciated, and it's appreciated when there's an ROI. And we acquire for different reasons, and we pay different amounts for different reasons. And sometimes it's brand exposure. We'd love to be a Subaru dealer, by the way. I just want to put that out there. So there's lots of different ways to articulate the value of a store. These things require a lot of capital and a lot of... Being a car dealer is really easy to understand and very hard to do. The business is not complex, but it's very hard to execute on efficiently and effectively. So we look at all the sort of variables that go into it, but ultimately it comes out to, can we get an ROI? Do we have the operational wheelbase or capacity? So i.e., do we have people on the bench ready to go that we are comfortable with, that will run the store? Do we like the market? Do we like the brand? And do we think we can get a return? And the return isn't necessarily, as some folks in the industry will describe, as based on, it's often reflected in multiple of trailing earnings. For us, it's always got to be a derivative of what future earning potential is. Trailing earnings don't mean anything. We've paid 15 times for stores what they previously earned. Maybe not that much, but close. Because we feel that operationally we can extract significant improvement. So it really comes down to what we think we can do with the store.
So Andrew, are you saying that you're typically looking then for underperforming dealerships as targets?
It's always the holy grail. You always want to pay a little and make a lot. Those are becoming fewer and further between. Through consolidation, in more intense competition, it's harder to survive. These businesses, I think it's becoming harder to survive and to be passive in your business. So of course, yeah, so our best acquisitions have been ones that we bought that were broken and fixed.
Right.
And quite frankly, sometimes a really broken store is easier to turn than a mediocre store. Because often mediocre stores, people think they're okay, and you have to convince them first that they're broken, and then change them. Broken stores, you can say, okay, well, we're wearing our clothes backwards tomorrow because wearing forwards didn't work, so you can change stuff up.
We see, really, there's two types of buyers out there. There's the buyers like Andrew that do look for an underperforming store and have the wherewithal and the human resources and the human capital to be able to plug into that store along with their own processes and their partnerships with different companies and different partners that can quickly look at a store and turn that store around. There's another portion of our buyers that look at it and say, I don't want an underperforming store because I just don't have that human capital available. So I want to find a store that's got a good general manager, a good sales manager, a good parts manager already involved. And it may take me a little bit longer to recoup my money because it's going to be a steady Eddie, but they just don't have the human capital to do it. The big thing with us right now is we're seeing a lot of rural stores go up for sale. And although there are, medium and large size dealer groups that are interested, you guys are in the driver's seat right now because human capital is the biggest issue for any dealer group. It's hard to find really good general managers that you can bank on, especially if I want to buy a store that may be outside of my geographic comfort zone. So I may be based in Barrie and there's a store I want in North Bay, but who's going to run that store for me is the biggest question. And for young people moving up into the world, and if you have aspirations of being a dealer principal, we're seeing more and more dealer groups acquire with a minority partner who is the general manager and has an opportunity to potentially work up as a dealer principal. And that's really where we're seeing the changes. One side really wants the broken store that I can fix because I have all the, my T's crossed and my I's dotted that I have in place, and the other buyers are saying, no, I want a well-working store that can continue working well and has the people in place to continue doing that. I'll pay a premium for it.
Okay, well, let's move on and talk about the valuation of a dealership. When you're looking at a dealership, how do you put a price on what it's worth?
Lev? So Lev plays the role of matchmaker in these many of these transactions today, and so there is an element of like anything where there's a sought after asset. When there's competition, it usually drives value, and there's a couple of folks in Lev's industry today, them being really the preeminent player, and through their process, I think it's driven up some values. Not that that's but it's also created a market that maybe wasn't established before. But how do we establish a value? Again, it's a derivative of forward-looking earnings and market brand. It's really it's a potential of the store combined with sort of best guesstimates on the amount of energy and effort and that's going to go into actually extracting that latent potential, right? So
Andrew nailed it on the head. And again, every buyer has their own needs and their own wants. So everybody really does look, ROI being the big thing. It depends on Andrew's version of ROI might be different than somebody else's. Some people pay strictly based on the past 3 years' performance is what I think the value of the store is, not what I can put into it. That's my own blood, sweat, and tears that I'm going to put into it over the next 3 or 4 years. There are a lot of factors involved. Number one, like Andrew mentioned, there's brand. What's the value of a specific brand in a specific location at a specific time? And that seems to be changing quicker and quicker these days where, we've seen values drop in the past 6 months from 10 to 50% for some brands. I'm not going to mention which brands, but some brands their values have dropped by about 50% in the last 6 to 12 months. There's a number of driving factors for that, obviously profitability and market share and the market in general. But that's one factor. Other factor people are going to look at is what kind of investment do I have to make into that store itself? And that could be driven by the OEM. It could be a reimage. There's a number of manufacturers right now that do have reimage programs in play. And a lot of the people that are selling their stores right now are people who are hitting retirement age, may not have any succession plan in place, and the manufacturer comes to them and says, I need you to spend $3.5 million to reimage your store. Well, if you're hitting 70 years old and don't feel like going through the pain of a 2-year redevelopment or a 2-year rebuild, majority of those people are the ones that are selling. And out of the 170 plus transactions we've done, 50% have been for retirement.
it's probably another factor that I don't think gets talked about a lot, but just like the mortgage business, how willing and able, I suppose, the banks are, because a lot of these large dealer groups are acquiring stores through levered financing, and so it's there's two pieces, a number of pieces to that equation, but the two big ones are you're levering it operational profits. So how good is the current market? Are existing operations doing well? Are they profitable? And then the second part is how comfortable is the bank moving forward? You know, banks are anywhere from 200 to 400% multiples of EBITDA in acquisition lines for big stores or for big groups. That sort of fuels the big getting bigger, because you know, when we have 10 or 15 bought and paid for dealerships that have no debt associated with them, we can lever all that profit up into acquiring another store. That also allows us to pay up sometimes in a valuation for something we want.
From an OEM perspective, we're starting to see more and more non-traditional capital coming into the retail auto world. Warren Buffett with Berkshire Hathaway, he's been big into the States. Specifically in Canada, we're starting to see some Bay Street and Wall Street money, starting to come up, and it's a safe place to put your money. Think about it, if the dealership goes bankrupt, the OEM's going to send in car carriers and they're going to pull all the inventory. You get your real estate, and that's where you're going to make most of your money. So it's trying to navigate that world as well, because you're having non-automotive mindsets coming into our world. And this is a relationship business. It's a relationship with customers, it's a relationship with the OEM, it's a relationship with dealers. And that's a little bit of a changing landscape right now. You're seeing a lot of OEMs changing their pitch when it comes to publicly traded groups. A lot of OEMs, you know, stayed away from the Auto Canadas of the world, and now they're starting to go in, and they're starting to see that a little bit more. So, and I know we'll probably talk about this in a little bit later, but the proliferation of auto groups is just growing substantially. Like these guys are talking about right here, Andrew and Lev, consolidation is going on like mad right now. It seems like every other month I'm trying to close a buy sell right now and do due diligence and sign off from my end. So it is a state of the industry that's constantly in flux right now. So it's trying to manage that to make sure, you know, that person, that dealer operator that's going to be representing that brand in the locale, because the dealership's the face of the brand. You know, the factory may be the face to the dealer, but ultimately the dealer's the face of the brand to the buying public. And without customers, you know what, none of us have a livelihood to go on moving forward. So,
You mentioned dealership imaging programs. Can you offer an opinion from the three different perspectives on factory image programs, which can often be quite contentious?
I said earlier that I don't think facilities sell cars, and really to change that phrase a little bit, people do. And so for us, we focus more on who's in between the four walls than necessarily with. I mean, it needs to be a brand, an extension of the brand. We understand the OEM's expectation and desire, because it's consistent with ours, to have a clean, well-represented facility. You know, facilities in this town that are part of our organization, George and BMW, 400 Chrysler out on the highway is a beautiful facility, very Ford, very Chrysler. So we believe in having the right facilities. Truthfully, and I'm about to embark on 2 facility renos down in southwestern Ontario. The part that excites me most about the facility renovations, quite frankly, is how it manifests for our staff. I think it just makes for better environments, and that could be because they were pretty long in the tooth in a couple of these facilities, so it'll be a really nice improvement for the folks. It's just a better environment to work in, it's more comfortable. So we recognize the need for facilities to be, again, an extension of what the brand is and who the brand represents, and they're the community connection. We also think, however, that the needs for facilities on a go forward probably are going to shift, and so when we're planning renos today, we're trying to be very careful to make sure every square foot is muscle, and because we don't know, we don't think that 4, 5, 6 sprawling acres necessarily is what the market is going to require in 7 or 10 years from now. Most manufacturers are moving to a pick-up and drop-off type, or at least studying it, services. So the dealership itself as a sort of a community hangout, which I think a lot of people were hoping it would maybe become in the last iteration of renovations. I don't think, personally, like, how many of you guys want to hang out at a car dealership? Would you rather they pick the car up in your driveway, drop you something cool, and then drop it back off for your service, right? So I think the desires of the consumers shifting, and we just want to make sure that we carve it right, and we don't buy property at $1 million an acre to do that.
We've seen larger and larger and larger dealerships being built, and unfortunately it puts a lot of stress on those dealers to the point where a lot of them decide to sell. But it also, I think, sometimes is a hindrance to that relationship between the dealer and the OEM. You know, if you're looking at a city like Vancouver, where you're $10 to $12 million an acre, and your manufacturer wants you to be on 6 acres and build a 50 or 60,000 square foot facility that's going up 8 stories, you know, you're looking at a $90 million build prior to even selling a vehicle. And you know, the feedback we're getting from a lot of the dealers that are in that market are, you know, there's fear. There's fear that the market will change. There's fear that, you know, there's a big unknown of what the next 5-10 years looks like when you have companies like Tesla who will come to your house, plug in a computer, reprogram it right in your driveway and go, and that's your service call. You know, the question is, where's the next 5-10 years, or what does that look like on the retail business model? The retail business model, although it's changed, has really stayed the same over the past 100 years. And I think the fear of the unknown and the capital investment that's being put on a lot of the dealers right now is they're getting a lot of pushback, which end of the day, listen, I'll call a spade for me. It's good for business. But for the long-term health of the industry, again, I agree with Andrew. I think the facilities need to be updated and cleaned up. There are a lot of facilities that are, and I see a lot of them that haven't been touched in 15, 20 years that do need to be upgraded. It's to what level is that upgrade necessary for specific markets, especially like rural markets. I've got a Korean brand store in a very rural market in a town of 5,000 people that the manufacturer wants them to build 14,000 square foot facility, and it's going to cost upwards of $3.5 to $4 million to build for a store that sells 130 new cars. The ROI on that just doesn't make sense, and that's really where that pushback is coming.
Actually, I just had a facility conversation last week with a dealer. From my perspective, I like to have facility conversations that are market driven. I don't like to have conversations that are based on just checking a box. So we can say, oh, you have the latest ACM paneling out front and you've got an updated customer lounge. I'd rather have conversations that are based on, listen, your throughput through the store has consistently gone up 15-20% every single year. Your strain on your service department needs to be addressed. So those are better conversations to have as opposed to saying, listen, yeah, world headquarters has a new look. Let's go ahead and do this. Because frankly, return on investment is key. We're not in this business to be a charity. You know what? We all have to make money at the end of the day and ethically, but I still think that, you know, those are just conversations that are much more better had. What these guys touched on, I struggle with this because if we go full electric, there's going to be a 60 to 70% drop in service revenues. So if you're asking a dealer to expand service capacity, which is something I'm dealing with right now, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you know, 15, 20 years from now, is this space going to be fully utilized? You know, there's no point in putting up all these additional hoists, having the human capital when frankly, vehicles don't need it. So that's something that we're struggling with right now. No one knows which way the industry is going to go. There's a lot of bets being made on the factory side, just hoping that they're going to be involved with subscription services, electrification, autonomous driving. There's a lot of stuff going on right now, but frankly, no one knows what the industry is going to look like in 5, 10, 15 years. I still think dealers are going to serve a purpose. The question is, what's the future landscape going to look like?
Perhaps we could then visit the difference between working with dealers standalone points and working with dealer groups. What is the difference there? Or is there any difference?
We've seen a drastic reduction in single point stores. 2016 there was about 1,300 single point stores in Canada. Currently there's about 1,100, and we're going to see anywhere from a 10 to 15% reduction probably in the next 2 years of single point stores. Like Andrew mentioned, there is a large contingent of dealer groups that are growing. Everybody knows the big ones. Everybody knows the Auto Canadas and the Lowrys of the world and the Go Autos and the large dealer groups that have a significant presence. What we're seeing though on our end of it is what we call the hometown dealer group, which is a big growing demographic. We're seeing it in rural markets where you're a dealer in a small market outside of any major metropolitan city, somewhere like a Bracebridge or a Huntsville or a Chatham, Ontario, and you have your one store and you're become dealer principal and you want to grow your business. You're still young, you want to grow your business. What we're seeing is that market's growing where those dealers are now purchasing the stores in rural markets. The big players, the Dilawris and the AutoCanadas and the bigger groups of the world, they don't want small rural markets, which is a great opportunity for anybody who wants to grow their own business because you're paying a lot less in land and building value. You typically get a larger gross on your vehicle sales. You have a more loyal customer base. And we're seeing the groups that started off with 1 or 2 stores in rural markets now expand to 3, 4, 5, and 6 stores. Even some city dealers who sold their businesses in the city for very, very hefty profits have taken that money because they don't necessarily want to retire, but they want to keep busy and they don't want to deal with 150 or 100 employees, but they want a small rural store and they're going by on the outskirts as well. So that's really where we're seeing a lot of the growth. On the large dealer group side, we're seeing a number of large dealer groups actually sell off some of their assets. So they may have 15, 20, 25, 30 stores, and they may have 1 or 2 stores that may not fit their bucket anymore. They may be outside the realm for whether it's a manufacturer or whether it's geographically. Mike and Ryan sold Durham Chrysler because geographically it did not fit within their mix. One's based out of London, one's based out of Barrie. They decided that the store that's for either of them to get to is going to take a few hours, just was not worth holding on to anymore. Let's divulge that asset and put that money elsewhere. We're also seeing the large dealer groups sell off assets based on human resources. And if you think about it, they may have 15 or 16 stores and they have one underperforming store that they don't feel will become extremely profitable. Well, if they have a good general manager, they would rather have that general manager in a store that's going to make them $2 or $3 million a year versus $200,000 or $300,000 a year. So they end up holding onto their human capital and divulging in that store. As far as nationally, yeah, the dealer groups are going to continue to grow. We think the next wave will be the U.S. dealer groups coming to look at the Canadian dealer groups. We've had conversations with a number of publicly traded U.S. groups that have looked at the Canadian marketplace, and they have come in on the truck side of the world. So Penske or Premier Truck purchased a number of stores in Ontario, and just most recently a company called Rush Truck Group, which is 120 truck dealers, just bought 50% of Talman Truck Centers. So the Americans have moved in on the truck side of the world. Will they come in on the automotive side? They will. It's just a matter of economy of scale for them, and for them to come in and buy 1 or 2 or 3 stores doesn't make sense. They're looking for 20 plus dealer groups.
Do you see a lot of manufacturers, I guess, dealer groups coming in buying 5 GM stores in one geographical location? Do you see manufacturers saying, no, you're not doing that because you're going to put competition in that area, or does that happen? Is that...
Well, you would know better than me, but what we've seen is the manufacturers maybe put a halt or a slowdown on the large dealer groups that have acquired a lot over the past 5 years. And it's more so that what they're saying is, it's great, you've got the capital to do it, and you've bought 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stores in the last 5 years. But what they want to see is what kind of performance do those large dealer groups, what can they do operationally in those stores that they've bought before they allow them to buy anymore. And that's really what we're seeing is we don't mind you buying, but let's slow down, show me what you can do with this store, and then we'll approve you for another store. Like Grant said, with publicly traded companies, that's new. There have been a lot of manufacturers that would not allow publicly traded companies to purchase their dealer base. We're proud we've sold the first Ford store to a publicly traded company, which was Rose City Ford in Windsor. That was really the first time that Ford Canada has allowed that to happen. I think it's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen, and there's no stopping it, really.
Yeah, on the OEM side, for a manufacturer to kick a buy-sell out, legally they have to have reasonable terms as to why they would say no. Not to say it's going to be an easy go-through, but for the most part, you know what, if a factory's going to say no, they have to have a rock-solid case as to why they're going to turn down a buy-sell. To your point, would a group come in and buy 5 stores in one fell swoop, adding to Lev's point, it's highly unlikely. There's proven performance that they want to make sure that, you know, the operator knows what they're doing and they have a good track record, sales volume, you know, service retention, customer satisfaction scores. But also, if there is a disagreement between the OEM and the dealer group, then it gets a little contentious because that group can control too much volume.
Yeah.
You know, because say you have a dealer group that controls 10% of your planning volume nationally, and there's a disagreement, that dealer group is going to say, find someone to buy me. Oh, that's right. No one can buy me out right now. Or the pool that those people that can cut the check is extremely small.
So that begs the question, do OEMs treat dealer groups differently than single points?
In all honesty, no. With our dealer network, 60% of our dealer network is comprised of groups. So it's basically people that own 3 other stores that are non-Subaru stores. So groups are treated equally. It's just the operational philosophy is just a little bit different, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Most groups these days have vested general managers, you know, quote unquote skin in the game. So when you have that general manager that is getting a piece of the action, usually they're motivated to do what's right. And they want to see performance because, you know what, not only do they get their dream of obviously, you know, getting a piece of the action, but also there's a bit of a financial reward there as well. So that's one thing that we like to see. But in terms of groups getting treated differently, no. Your single point store is going to get treated the same as a group store. It's just who you talk to is a little bit different. Like your dealer principal might be at a corporate office as opposed to actually in the store.
There may be an optic of that from the outside looking in, but I think that's a derivative of existing relationships and access to one of the other C's usually, which is a criteria for acquisition, which is the capital. So the dealer groups inherently are at the table because they have a relationship usually existing with these OEMs, and usually they have access to real estate and usually they have access to capital. So it usually puts them at the table in these discussions. My personal opinion is fairly biased, but I still think I'm right. That the best representation that can exist in the market is exactly what Grant just described, which is a combination of a dealer group that's going to provide stability, capital, consistency, some harmonized process so we can train, coach. I mean, we like to refer to ourselves as a boutique dealer group, and that's weird to call our a business boutique that has 1,200 employees and almost $1 billion in revenue, right? So, but we are in the grand scheme of auto retailers. We're a boutique. We're only in Ontario. We're, you know, a certain number of stores, etc. So, but for us, we can lever up, in our opinion, the best of both worlds, which is the combination of scale. We think we have enough scale to compete in whatever eventuality may come forward. We've got scale to compete for any acquisition that may pop up. When I say eventuality, whatever the retail network looks like 5, 7, 10 years down the road. But then on the flip side, we also have operators. We have guys like me that came in 2012 and bet my whole life that I had to please the customer in the showroom. I had to sell the cars. I had to make sure that customers were happy. I had to make sure that we were representing the brand appropriately, not just because it's the right thing to do, but I had to. So I think to Grant's point, a combination of the scale of a larger organization with the skin in the game of an individual operator, that's 100% our model. We're a business of partnerships, and it's not because for any other reason, there's not an altruistic reason. Frankly, we think it's best for the partner, and it's best for us, and it's best for the OEM. So.
I've heard on occasion people described as flippers. Now, we've all heard of flipping houses, people who look for older houses that need to be improved, go in, do the work, and then flip them for a profit and move on to the next project. Are we seeing that kind of thing going on in the car business now, where people are purposely looking for underperforming dealerships with the intention of buying them, improving them, and then getting rid of them, selling them for a profit and moving on? Are we seeing that now?
Yeah, definitely. So I can only speak to our own metrics. We measure everything, and for every transaction we've done and all the valuations that we've done in the past. Right now, what we call profit takers is about 20% of the transactions that we've done over the past 4 years have been what we call profit takers, which is exactly that. They'll go into an underperforming dealer, buy it for maybe under market value, plug in their processes, plug in some people, turn that store around, keep it for 3 to 4 years, and then resell it back on the marketplace, take that money and then continue doing that. So there is that. That's about 20% of the market right now.
Right.
10% of the buy and sells are really a push from the OEM. When typically that's done on more on a re-image basis where the people don't want or don't have the capital to re-image. 50% is retirement. 50% of the sellers right now are people who are choosing to retire from the marketplace. So that's definitely a market out there for people who are doing that.
So the people, the dealers looking to retire, are they hanging on to the real estate and becoming landlords?
50-50.
Yeah.
Yeah, 50% are cashing out of everything, taking their building for land, money, assets, net worth, and goodwill, and enjoying a happy retirement in Scottsdale or wherever they choose to retire. Other people look at the land and building a lot like a pension or a retirement fund where they know they can collect. You know, in the automotive business, we're seeing an average of about 7% cap rate on real estate, which if you do the math can be a pretty healthy retirement if you're sitting on a $4 or $5 million property. And buyers typically want the property for the most part, but a seller will put terms where it's a 5 and 5 years with an option to purchase after 10 years. And that takes them from their 60s to their 70s, and in their 70s they can sell off their real estate to somebody they currently have in place.
Okay, very good, thank you. Key success factors for a dealer. What would you say are the key success factors for somebody who wants to be a dealer? What makes a good dealer? Personally and professionally.
Well, I'm curious to hear Grant's answer. I think, first of all, our business is, so it's human capital. It's about recruiting and it's about staffing with the right people on the team. So sort of a reiteration of what I said earlier, it's less about the walls, although they're important. It's more about who's in between them. And we spend a lot of time here trying to find those people. So the reason that those people, in particular this school, generates out such great candidates is because our business, the retail business, usually is made up of folks that choose. You guys all raised your hand and said, I want to be part of this business. And there's a very specific, explicit, obvious difference between the folks that raise their hand and say, I want to be in it, and those that end up in it. So we spend a lot of time trying to find those that want to be in it. So what makes a good dealer? In my opinion, I think it's a couple parts street smarts and being able to relate to consumers and to staff. It's definitely a component of recruiting and building an appropriate team. There is some process development. These businesses there's literally hundreds of processes that go into writing a repair order and properly repairing a customer's car, returning it to them on time, everything done properly, documented accordingly. So certainly some process acumen, and probably a healthy appetite for some risk, because these businesses don't run themselves. They absolutely require, I didn't understand at first. When I first partnered with Mike, he said, you'll never get a day back out of the store. And I was like, I'd spent, unlike Lev, I traded in, I used to have weekends and nights off, and now I realize that retailers don't necessarily always get that. But I didn't understand what he meant by you never get a day back out of the store. You realize real quick that businesses run better in a hands-on environment when you're there to help influence and steer and guide decisions. So I think, again, back to the OEM selection of operators, people that want to operate. So for our business, we are not passive investors. We're involved. We'd like to steer the direction of the ship. We like to make sure that the culture is a reflection of who we want to be. So I don't know if I've answered your question or ran around it, but it's...
Yeah, from the factory side, I would definitely say it's operational philosophy. That's one of the biggest things that we look at. And more importantly, it's how you treat that human capital. How do you have employees that are engaged? I've been a rep on the road going in, being the factory guy, and it's crazy. I can't describe it, but usually walking into a dealership, within 2 minutes, you pick up a vibe as to what's going on in there. And it's a gut feel, and you know what? When you have a general manager or dealer principal that really cultivates a real employee-centric kind of culture, that's something that flows through to the customer experience. And ultimately, I think everyone's trying to figure out how do you get the right people? And like Andrew said, this is the best feeding ground for our industry, because you have people that are actually interested and have the heart and the soul and the passion to come into this business. And that's something, it's hard to find good people these days. You know, it's hard to find people that have the right attitude in this business. And you know, when you find those kind of diamonds in the rough, it's amazing what it does in terms of, you know, people wanting to come in and they're just basically, they'll just lay down their money and say, I want to do business with you guys because I love dealing with you. So that's the one thing we really impress upon any dealer candidates is we like to know what's their philosophy when it comes to running the store. What's their community involvement? You know, do they understand digital marketing? Like that's something that's changed our business monumentally. You know, the brick and mortar showroom is really kind of dropping off, and the virtual showroom is the main touch point. You know, 90% of consumers, they're going to touch your website before they even come in and touch a hood. So that's one of the. I don't know if I answered the question either, Alan, but I just kind of rambled a little bit.
No, excellent. I want to hear what Lev has to say because he's dealing on both sides of the coin.
You know what? It's you're part lawyer, part accountant. As a dealer, it seems you're wearing more than just one hat. And you know, we look at stores that are very highly successful, and we also work with stores that are maybe not as successful. I think the biggest difference between one and another is just having a hands-on owner, or having someone who is there at the very least on a daily basis, or has someone who is there on a daily basis. You know, we walk into stores I walk into 2-3 stores a day for the most part, and it's true. You can walk into a store and feel the difference in energy from one to the next. There are stores that have a presence about them, and I think that really starts at the top. That starts with either the dealer principal or the general manager. And then you walk into other stores that, you know, I've actually timed. I walked into one dealer, I'm not going to say who it is, but it took 12 minutes for someone to approach me on the dealership floor. That's a problem. And it really came down to what we see with the dealers that we're selling that aren't as successful is they're just not there. They're absentee owners, or they're at that point of their career, which is probably smart for them to retire, that they spend 3-4 months south and allow their pseudo general manager run that store, or no offense to dealer kids, or they let their son run that store, who may not exactly have exactly the skin in the game that his father had in the past. And for me, it really comes down to human resources, and I think the dealer has to be active in that business, just like any business.
Okay, great. Here's the topic. Handling conflict between an OEM and a dealer. I've had dealers tell me that potential source of conflict between the OEM and the dealer is pretty much any time the OEM wants the dealer to spend money. Perhaps you can confirm or deny this, but also talk about, well, how do you work with your counterpart to resolve conflicts that do come up?
Conflict.
A little louder.
I would say it's how you approach the situation. That's ultimately how there are some uncomfortable conversations that need to happen in this business from a dealer level and from a factory level, whether it's something that's illegal that's happened, you know, that has direct implications on the brand, or even just simple disagreements. There are characters out there on the factory side and also on the dealer side as well. So I think ultimately, I'm gonna throw something out here. I had something happen in my early days being on the field. I actually had a dealer blackmail me to get him approved as the